chat as we go along. I might ask you guys questions as well, and then okay, cool. Can you guys see that? Is that in presenter view for you? Can you see enough of the whole screen? Cool.
We still see the bar at the
yeah,
top and stuff.
that's okay. So I'm going to start with the heavy stuff, and then we'll ease off. But it's the big stuff I'm going to hit you with first. So my belief is, from a lot of studying and reading I've done, that effectively human beings have two purposes. One purpose is universal; it's the same for every human being. And actually, so I should give an introduction. So what I'm going to do is, through the presentation, I'm going to give you little mental models and ways to think about the world or yourselves, or to give you more effectiveness. And I'm not saying that any of these are right, and it may not be that you agree with all of them, but take what resonates with you and test it out and use it and see if it kind of works for you. So as I said, I kind of believe that everyone has two purposes. So one is universal and common to everyone. And I think that is to become the best version of yourself you can be, right? Now, whatever that looks like, it could be that you become the best, you know, if you're going to be a teacher, you're the best teacher you can be. If you're going to be in sports, you're the best sports person you become the best that you can possibly be in a particular field, or generally who you can be. And I think that's the same for everyone. What I've read about and learned is that working towards that, or that at least that aim, helps give people kind of direction, and peace, I guess, is another thing. And part of what that looks like is overcoming your own, there's been different names for it, but people call it resistance, or your inner demons, or your inner challenges. It's the voice that tells you that you're not good enough. It's the voice that tells you, you know, other people are better than you. Why are you trying to do that? And actually overcoming that voice is often kind of one of the most powerful things you can do. And it's never a challenge that finishes. You're kind of always doing. I think the second purpose that every human being has is unique to them. And that's what we would call a massive transformative purpose. So there's something particular and unique that you probably want to do or see happen in the world. That might be education, it might be climate change, but there's a very specific thing that you've probably got a lot of passion around, and that you could make be the transformative purpose, or the massive change that you want to see in the world, that you would drive towards. And as I said, that's quite unique for people. Now, the difference that people think is that the MTP, or your massive transformative purpose, is you create it and then you change the world. But actually, another way to look at it is that your purpose, you use it to create yourself. So if you look at someone like Elon Musk, the chap on the left is the guy that started Zip2, which was his first startup. He could never have run SpaceX or run Tesla, right? So what he did was, throughout his life, he set an MTP. And an example of a massive transformative purpose is Tesla's, which is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, or SpaceX, which is to make humanity a multi-planetary species. By setting that transformative purpose for the companies, he set it for himself. And then he has to become the type of person that can create that future. So it's a very particular distinction about thinking about, it's not necessarily that you create a mission for yourself and you change the world, but actually by creating that mission for yourself, you force yourself to bring forth the actions and skills out of you, and to become the person that can deliver that change in the world. So just conscious to think about, you know, what is the change you want to see in the world? What would you like to deliver? And actually think about making it be the thing that makes you. I'm going to give you the second most powerful point I have is integrity. Does anyone want to put on the chat, what do you think I mean by integrity? Just type in the chat any comments and say, you know, what does that word mean to you? Any comments? Yeah, you're typing away. Holding to what you believe in, that you can be trusted. Okay. Thanks, Milan. Thanks, Jill. Believe what you believe in, having clear moral standards. Perfect. Anyone else? Okay, going forward while not compromising your beliefs. Okay, going forward. Okay, perfect. Okay, I'll tell you what in this particular context what integrity means, and it's actually probably the most hardest thing for any human being to do, right? In fact, actually, I would go so far as to say it's impossible for any human being to do this. And integrity is, and it's that first line, is honoring your word. And what that means is doing what you said you would do by when you said you would do it in the manner that you said you would do it, whether you said it to other people or to yourself. Now, how often as a percentage do you think during the day that you match that definition of integrity? Yeah, you see, now I can see the smiles on the faces, right? So this is probably, and I'll explain to you why it's one of the most powerful things. This is probably the most powerful way to change your life, is to do what you said you would do when you said you would do it in the manner you said you would do it. And if you can't do it, you say you won't, and say either that you will do it and by when, or that you won't at all, and clean up any issues that you not keeping your word around that would have. Now, if you can do this, and as I said, it's actually practically impossible for any human being to live 100% this standard. But if you were able to do it, I think it would completely transform your life. And the reason why it's so powerful, any ideas why doing that is so powerful? Got some confused faces. Any comments on the chat? Or you can actually shout out if you want, because we haven't got many people on the call.
Maybe because it doesn't let you give up to your own emotion, or like emotional ineffectiveness and procrastination.
Yeah.
¿Pero qué está hablando? No sé.
Any other comments?
Ah, ya lo veo.
Oh.
La integridad.
Hello, is that Claire? Are you? Nope, I think that's everyone. So here's why I think integrity is so powerful. Is it's when you set those intentions that are with integrity, you're doing it with the higher level of your thinking. So you're doing it with the part of your brain that's the higher level ambition, the higher level thinking, the one that wants to see you do well in life. It's kind of, if you want to think of, I mean, I'm not an expert in neuroscience, but if you want to think of like the base, kind of the reptilian brain versus the neocortex, I think this is where you're really doing deliberate thinking, and you're thinking at your highest level. And what takes you out of being in integrity is your emotion, as Christoph mentioned, in the moment. And that's your base level. That's your fear talking. If you want to talk about the amygdala in your brain, that's that part of your brain talking. So no one else has actually, even the people that taught me this concept, they didn't actually think about it in this way. But I think the reason it's so powerful is by following integrity, you live to your highest level of thinking and your highest level of potential. And that's why I think it's so powerful. It's the part of you that will, get out of bed at 6 a.m. to go to the gym. It's the part of you that finishes the essay that you said you would do to the standard, you would do it. It's the part of you that has a conversation with someone you love because you had an argument with them because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's why it's so powerful. So just to think about that, think about, where can you apply integrity in your life? I'll give you my personal integrity story is when I did the course that taught me this concept. Part of what they do is they make you fix integrities that you've had broken in your life in the past. And so when I was a student, I worked in a bookshop. And I actually stole books from the bookshop. I took books that were textbooks that I needed to study, but I also took other books. And every time, because I know the bookshop was next to my university, is that anytime I was ever near that bookshop, I could feel, the guilt about having taken it. And then part of cleaning that up was that I had to go and tell them and go into the shop and tell them that I'd done this. Now, this is 20 years later. And I said bye to my wife before I went to do this. And she was saying, okay, I love you. And, if I don't see you again, you get thrown in jail, all this stuff. And she was really like, I was getting really freaked out and I really didn't want to go and do this. And so I walk into this shop. So I'm walking in and there's a university. I asked, who's the manager here? And the guy comes up to me, he's the manager. And he's like, you know, a university student, because it's a university bookshop, and they're all like young there. And I say, look, I used to work here. He's, oh wow, yeah. And I said, look, I stole books when I worked here, and I'd like to pay for them. And he's like, I don't know how you can do that. Oh my God, I don't know what to say. And so he got completely confused, and he said, there's no way you can pay for them because we don't know which ones they are. We can't put them through the system. So I said, okay, but I need to pay for them. And he said, okay. And I said, how about I pay and buy a whole load of book vouchers for everyone in the store? And he's like, everyone that works there. And he said, okay. So basically I bought £300 worth of book vouchers, which was £10 for every one of the 30 people that worked in the store. And that's how I paid for the books I'd stolen, right? And then cleaning, the thing it did was walking out of there, it lifted that weight from my shoulders that was in my brain that I didn't even realize, you know, it's always there in the background knowing you stole these books, and you don't realize how much it weighs you down or how much it compromises you. But by doing that, it kind of really released that for me. So it's an interesting story. It's a bit difficult sometimes to say, but that's an example of why it's so powerful. And actually cleaning up integrity, like where you've had an argument, let's say we're all human. So I'm pretty sure that all of you have had arguments with either a best friend or a family member that you're not really talking to so much now, or anyone that might be, and thinking about, you know, is that worth it? And where can I have the integrity? Where can I go and clean that up and have that conversation with them and say, look, I'm sorry for having this argument, even if it was their fault. Putting the relationship and the connection and the love you have with that person, making that more important than who's right or wrong, right? So think about, you know, where those things exist for you and where that might be powerful to have that conversation, and not have expectations from that other person that they would suddenly turn around and say, oh, yes, you're right, but I was also wrong, or any of that. Just, you know, cleaning that up for yourselves. So think about it, think about where that might be useful for you. The other thing that is a super powerful thing for you guys to do is doing what you don't want to do. And the definition of this is kind of called suffering. Any ideas, again, anyone in the chat, why is this such a powerful thing? And I only figured this one out recently as well, is going out and intentionally doing the things that you don't want to do, that you know are good for you. Obviously not things that are bad for you, but doing things that you don't want to do that you know are good for you. Any comments, anything anyone has a thought around? Typing going on.
I mean, like you said, if it's things that are good for you, then generally, if you're gonna like go out and do them, even though you don't want to do them, then maybe in time you'll get used to it and start to like actually doing the things that are good for you.
This is, I'm going to give you that. That's the best answer I've had from anyone, Rock. That's exactly it. It's literally training yourself to have integrity. So, you don't want to do them, but you know it's the right thing to do. So let me think about a way to do it. So the way I did this was having cold showers in the morning for a while. Like literally, I don't want to have the cold, like I put it on fully cold. I don't want to go in, but by doing things that, and I'm not saying cold shower is good for you, but it could be anything, right? It could be going on long runs, could be doing the gym workout, could be anything that you kind of, you know, doing. I put down the list last year, and I read a book called Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. I would 100% recommend all of you read that book and do the exercises in the book. The book is great, but the audiobook is even better. He's a former Navy SEAL, and he gives the best breakdown of how to change your life for the better. He swears a lot and all this stuff in the book, so just to give you a warning. But his concept is, by doing what you don't want to do, you train yourself to have integrity. Can't Hurt Me is the name of the book. I'll type it up in the chat. It's the book I most recommend to everyone I know. And if you do the exercises, you have to do the challenges that he puts in the book. I did that. I put my ones I put down last year were, what things do I hate to do? I hate being cold. So I started having cold showers. I hate being cold. So I used to run outside in the cold. I used to hate running outside, and I ended up doing a half marathon just went out for a run, like a 1 hour run, and ended up doing an entire half marathon with no water and no food, never having gone anywhere near that far in my life before, because I was using the techniques in the book, right? I wouldn't recommend doing that because you can get injured, but just thinking about like kind of how do you push yourself. And so this is the quote from the guy, David Goggins. And he says, you have to go to war with yourself before you can find peace. And I think the concept here is overcoming, again, the part of you that doesn't want to do things, that resists taking action, that tells you you're no good. And part of the training for this is obviously like doing the things you don't want to do. One of the things I did was I did 100 burpees in under 15 minutes, I think, which was painful. But, you know, again, it wasn't because that necessarily to do it for the fitness, but it was literally to be able to push myself mentally to knock out that many burpees in that much time, which is not necessarily that quick a time, to be honest. I think under 12 minutes is probably a very good time for that. So those kind of concepts that I've given you the big four to begin with. So having the purpose, trying to be the best person, best version of yourself you can be, setting yourself a transformative purpose. Don't worry if those change. Like you can always kind of develop your purpose over your life as you get older, but having that there as a way of bringing the best out of yourself, having integrity, and then to train integrity, go out and do the things you don't want to do, just for the sake of kind of training yourself. And I think what you'll find is that by doing a lot of those things, you can actually make a big shift in the way you lead your life and the results you get from that. So those are the big ones. So we're going to move on to slightly easier stuff and slightly less heavy stuff. So anyone ever heard of the concept of systems versus goals, or looking at process versus outcome? Any comments in the chat, or you can shout out loud? Anyone? That's, see Alan smiling away. Anything that you guys, what does that mean for you when I say those things?
The second one is sort of obvious, where you, instead of saying I want to learn how to play the piano, is saying, okay, by next month I want to be able to read notes of 3 songs and play those on the piano.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Process over substance. Okay. So actually, I'd say actually even what you made, was it Milan, what you mentioned there, that's still a goal or outcome you mentioned. So the reason why systems versus goals are important is, look, if you read this quote here, it's a system is a set of related components that work together in a particular environment to perform whatever functions are required to achieve the system's objective. What that really means is that anytime you set a goal, let's say your goal is to lose, I don't know, 10 kilos in weight, right? Every day you're losing. Until you've achieved that 10 kilo weight in loss, every day you're failing, right? Because you haven't lost it. And it's very difficult for human beings to maintain motivation around specific goals. However, if you turn that into a set of systems or a set of process outcomes you have to achieve. So a process outcome could be, today I only ate 3,000 calories worth of food, for example, or today I went for my run, right? So every day you can say, did you follow your system that you created in order to be able to achieve your goal? And therefore, at the end of every day, you're winning, because you can tell whether you've met your system or not. And you can tick off and say, okay, I did all these things that are there. And by default, the goal is achieved. The other reason it's important to focus on systems rather than goals is, or process rather than outcome, is that we don't control the outcome. We only control the process. And I'll give you an example of this is, if you're submitting you're doing a university exam paper, you don't control whether that marker passes you or not. Okay, you control the quality of your answer. You control how neatly you write. You control the structure of how you put that answer together. You control how much you researched and how many hours you spent studying. But you don't actually control the decision that person has at the end of it to tick yes or no. And I think if you focus then on outcomes rather than process, you get frustrated because you realize you don't have power over the outcome. You only have power over the process that you follow. And then therefore, by following the process and creating a system around that process, that's how you achieve your goals. And it's a very, again, unique distinction, but I think any goal focus is self-defeating. I think you create the goals, but it's actually the system and the process is what you should focus on in order to achieve those things. And I think that's a very powerful distinction. Here you go. Yeah. So you're always failing. You always kind of, it can be like potential lack of action. You also miss feedback loops. So if you only focus on the goal or the outcome, you miss the feedback that you're getting. Did I follow my system? How well did I follow my system? And the second last bullet point is the most powerful one I've seen, is winners and losers all have the same goals. The difference is in the system or the process they use to follow it. And also, when you set goals, you're playing a finite game. We'll kind of get onto that in a little bit of a difference, but I don't know if any of you have heard the difference between infinite games and finite games. So yeah, so we'll come on to that in a little bit as well. Has anyone got any questions actually on that? Because that's quite a lot of content I've given you on goals versus systems. Anyone want to shout out? No. Okay, cool. Everyone's got that. Alan, you can change the process to it, but you do not change the goal. Yeah. No, you can do that. I mean, you can change the goal if you like. It's just, if you only focus on the goal, you know, pass my exams or get my degree or get this, it's very difficult because you don't have any control over that. What you have control over is the hours you study, the way you structure your approach, and the daily results you get. So it can get quite frustrating. Anyone heard the difference between maker time versus manager time? This comes from one of the most successful venture capitalists of all time. No? Okay. So let me see if I, because I'm having looked at this. So this is when you look at, and this applies to work, but you know, it could apply to studying as well. This is the ideal schedule. Now, the difference between manager and maker time is manager time is administrative time, and maker time is where you build or create things. So maker time could be where you write a report, write an essay, you're writing a book, you're designing something that takes concentration and hours and focus, like 2-3 hours of concentrated, uninterrupted time. Okay? And that's maker time. And then obviously manager time is where you're doing things like emails, meetings, and all the administrative stuff. Now, the problem that happens is that this is what happens to people's schedules, is in a work environment, their maker time is constantly interrupted by meetings and different bits and pieces. So this is what ends up happening, where you have a maker schedule on the right that gets broken up. And the fact is that it's in maker time where you do the things that really shift you forward and really shift your work forward or shift your studying forward. And the point is, you can't mix manager and maker time. So the way to get things done during your week is you have to block out maker time throughout your entire week, whether you're working or studying. And that's literally 2 to 3 hour blocks. Usually for most people, they're early in the morning, like first thing in the morning, either 7 a.m. or 9 a.m. Others, it can be later, but it's like 2-3 hour blocks of time throughout your week where you intentionally make sure you're not going to be disturbed. You turn your phone off. And this is actually where you get most of the work done. As I said, this was written by, this concept came out from Paul Graham. He's the founder of, what's it called again? Y Combinator, which is the incubator that incubated Dropbox and Airbnb and lots of different startups. It's I think it's the most successful startup incubator in the world. And this is something that he figured out, was that that's why he wasn't getting things done. For him, maker time was programming time, because that's when they would do their programming for their business. So again, think about how are you creating your schedule and where you've got manager time, maker time, and not having them mix. Anyone heard of the Eisenhower Matrix? Or the urgent, not urgent, important, not important matrix? Some people are nodding. Okay, so I'll just show you this. So this is it was used by President Eisenhower, who's one of the most productive US presidents. And it's a 4-box model where you look at what's not important or important, and you look at what's urgent or not urgent. Okay, and they're called kind of quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this is how he managed to kind of schedule and create his time, was looking at what's urgent and important. You do that first. Now the question is then, what do you do next? And what people tend to do is they do what's urgent but not important. It's the bottom left box. And the reason we do that is because it's an easy activity or an easy task to take on, and it feels urgent, so we do it immediately. The problem is that all the things that really make a difference for what we're doing long-term in our lives lie in the not urgent but important box. And these are the things that we put off and we don't do. And these are the things that usually need maker time as well. They need like large blocks of time to be dedicated to get those things done. I can give you examples of maker time. Could be things like, as I talked about, like, important but not urgent. Could be for, let's say, if I'm working, it could be developing a new offering for my company to sell, right, to clients, given the COVID-19 crisis, right? It's not necessarily urgent, but it is super important. And I could easily put it off for weeks at a time. Or it could be writing an article on, I don't know, management consultancy, right? Not that urgent, but it is important because by writing those articles, we get exposure to potential clients, right? It's a longer term play. Usually a lot of the stuff in that important but not urgent box is the stuff that you've been putting off for years. Like it might be learning an instrument or things that you really want to do, like go traveling to some particular town or particular place of the world or go live abroad. And the danger is that your important but not urgent tasks get put off forever. And you end up getting sucked into the urgent, not important stuff. The other reason why important and not urgent is, well, here's a question. Why do you think people don't do the important but not urgent stuff as well? What do you think stops people doing that?
Probably because they don't feel they have to do them at the moment.
Yeah.
And they always have things that come up and they are urgent. Yeah. So the ones which are not urgent are kept at the back.
Yeah.
Because they're time consuming. You're not quite sure how much it's going to take of your time. And you want to do something that you know the time limit on, and then you push it off because maybe it will be time consuming.
Okay. True. Anyone else?
I think it's also because they are afraid of failing. It's sometimes better not to do something than to fail. At least that's how we see stuff, I guess. But it's easier to just put them off for now.
Cool. So actually, I think that and what Milan said, exactly, and Rocket said exactly, it's suffering or you do not want to suffer. The things that are in your important but not urgent box are the things that have the most fear attached to them for you as an individual. They're the things you're most scared of doing, and that's why they get put off. And if you really think about all the things that you've always wanted to do, but you don't do, they're usually probably going to be the important but not urgent stuff. And if you think back over your life and think about what are the things that you did that made the greatest difference to the quality of your life, chances are there were things that you found that they were important, but you could easily have put off and not done, right? So what this Eisenhower Matrix says, and the way to be hyper effective in life generally, is obviously you have to do the important, urgent stuff first. Then you have to force yourself, and usually, as I said, with maker time, is to do the important but not urgent stuff. And it's difficult sometimes to do the important, not urgent, because obviously it's emotionally difficult to do them. But also it can be that people are constantly interrupting you. People expect you to be available, especially when you're working. You'll find this, that, you know, people send you emails at 9 o'clock in the morning. My recommendation to everyone with email is do not check your email until you've done your maker time, right? In the morning and during the day. So don't check email till like midday. It's a really hard thing to do when you start working full time. I literally used to go, when I was working full time as a consultant, I used to go sit in a different part of the office during the morning or even the whole day, so I wouldn't get disturbed, so I could get my maker time done. And when I started doing this, and also not checking my email till midday, I was actually getting my entire day's work done between 9 and 12 midday. That used to, and this is working as a management consultant, I could actually clear my entire work for the day in 3 hours, because what happened was I was able to focus and concentrate on the important stuff that needed to be done. Whereas my team members who were sat with the boss and sat with the clients, they were in work till about 8 p.m. every day, and I would be leaving at 5:30 because I'd clean my work up, and actually the afternoon I could do other stuff as well. So it's important to think about, you know, these techniques may sound that they're actually very powerful. They sound very simple, but they're actually super powerful. Persuasion. Anyone know what I'm talking about when we talk about persuasion? And this has actually come more to the fore recently, actually, with some things that are happening in the world. But what do we think about when we talk about persuasion?
I would say convincing people that they share the same goals as you do, or have the same, want to achieve the same things.
Okay. Anyone else? Any comments on kind of thinking about persuasion? So, persuasion is probably one of the most powerful macro skills you could have through the course of your life. I think there's a number of them, like negotiation, salesmanship, etc. But I think persuasion is probably the most powerful. And if you can, two things: if you can become persuasive, but if you can also combat persuasion when it's being used against you, I think you'll find some very powerful things. So let me talk a little bit about persuasion, and I'll give you a good example. So I'll let you read this advert here, this cartoon. And this is before Trump was elected. Yeah. So it's quite an interesting one. So this is a book written by a guy called Scott Adams, and he's the author of a cartoon called the Dilbert. I don't know if you've seen those cartoons. It's kind of an office cartoon strip. And again, I'm not endorsing Trump, but it's about the persuasion skills, whether they're positive or negative, is that when Donald Trump was 5th in the Republican race, Scott Adams put out a prediction, and he said that Trump is going to win the Republican nomination. And this is when he had I think it was like 5 people, actually, it was 6 in the race, he'd just entered. And he said, the reason is because Scott Adams said, I'm a trained hypnotist, and I can see that Trump is using hypnotic technique and masterful persuasion technique in what he's doing, and he's going to end up winning the Republican nomination. And I was fascinated, because I was like, that can't be right. And I actually followed his blogging, and he blogged the whole way through the Republican nomination, all the way through to Trump winning the presidency. And he was pretty much accurate every time with what was happening. And I think if you read this book, you'll get a good sense of what he's talking about. The context of this is Trump obviously has, I wouldn't endorse him, let's say, but he is and has been using very powerful persuasion techniques to achieve what he wants. And either as an individual, we need to be able to understand and be able to detect and define what persuasion techniques are being used by people, especially in a world where we're seeing much more populism and much more demagoguery happening, is thinking about how are people using these kinds of persuasion techniques. And also to use them, but not obviously in a negative sense, is saying, where can you use skills around persuasion to have a positive impact in the world? One of the things that he said was, Scott Adams described whilst Trump was kind of coming up, was he was using things like verbal kill shots. So does anyone remember the accusation of Jeb Bush being low energy? They don't remember that, right? Now, he defined that as a verbal kill shot. Scott Adams said, what that does is it puts a label against someone that has no other connotation. So if you think of low energy, you wouldn't think of anyone else. Like there's no other one that's ever been described like that. However, then when you attach it to Jeb Bush, you can't stop seeing that he's low energy. And then what can Jeb Bush do about it? Well, either he can stay the same, in which case he's being low energy Jeb Bush, or he can try and be high energy, in which case Trump could say, well, look at him, he's low energy, now he's trying to be high energy, which is something he did in a debate. And these are very powerful kind of sneaky, I'm not saying use them, but be aware of where these kinds of things are being used and how they're being used to manipulate people. Is he used that on every single one of the Republican nominees that was ahead of him. So whoever came first, I think it was, he used lying Ted, there was crooked Hillary. Do you remember all of these, like the ones that these techniques that were used, right? A lot of the time people are not aware of what's happening, but that was actually having a persuasive effect on Republicans and the general population, the way he was using those techniques. And there's obviously some very, let's say, evil people who've used techniques like this. I'm not saying Trump is necessarily, but there's been some very evil people who've used these techniques throughout history. And I think one of the key skills to learn or understand is how persuasion works and how it's used by people. There's also another book called Influence, which was written by a professor called Robert Cialdini. And actually, they think Robert Cialdini started advising the Clinton campaign towards the end of her campaign. If you remember, she was doing terribly against Trump and then started doing really well. And one of the persuasion techniques, one of the persuasion kill shots that Clinton's camp started using was the word dark to describe Trump, right? And they were using that as a kind of a fight, a fair fight, as Scott Adams described it. So I would look at the book Influence as well, which looks at 6 factors that are kind of baked into our psychology as human beings, which are highly persuasive for us. Warren Buffett's partner, Charlie Munger, he actually gave the professor 1 share in Berkshire Hathaway because he was so impressed by the book. And I think at the time that 1 share was worth $265,000 because that book, Influence by Robert Cialdini, was so powerful. So again, it's not saying something that you should necessarily use for your advantage, but it's good to understand how persuasion works and how easily human beings are persuaded. Scott Adams describes us as moist robots. And I think what some of the persuasion techniques do is they kind of hijack our brain. I'll give you another quick example is, again, not such a positive example, but after you have a mass shooting in the US, what's the phrase that a lot of people, or at least the National Rifle Association uses when people start questioning whether guns should be legal or not in the US? Because this one caught me out.
Guns don't kill, but people do.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. But how do they stop the debate dead there and then to say, you know, they can actually kill the entire debate with this one phrase?
Mental health.
Kind of, almost. Guns against guns, no? Okay, I'm going to give you the one. They say it's too soon to talk about it. Now, can you think of, like, I can see you're smiling. Imagine how powerful that phrase is in terms of persuasion. And the reason I noticed that, because it switched me off as well, is that every time there's a shooting, they'll say, and everyone starts saying we should ban guns. They say, no, it's too soon to talk about it. We need to focus on the victims. And then what happens is that dissipates the energy around having that debate until the next gun attack occurs. And then they say it again. And that is a very powerful persuasion technique. And the reason it's powerful is, and the reason I was very aware of it was actually I was pulled into that. And when I used to hear that, I was like, yeah, no, they're right. We should focus on the victims. But actually, it's a way of manipulating our own thought processes. So the reason why this is, as I said, important is to be able to understand where you're being persuaded and how you're being persuaded as a moist robot, which is all we human beings are. So something a little bit lighter, the SEM stack. So this is the 3 most powerful ways that a neuroscientist studied and said that we could be highly productive as individuals, as human beings. I'll give them to you because they're quite difficult to guess, but these are in order of power. Sleep. Yeah, for all important hard decisions. Yeah, so sleep is actually the most powerful way to become more productive. If you lack sleep, it has the greatest effect on your ability to be productive than anything else. You should be getting, I think, 7.5 to 8 hours sleep a night is recommended. And as soon as you start getting less than sleep than you need, obviously some people can get by on less. It actually starts to have a massive impact on your productivity. The next one is exercise, in that order. Regular exercise will make you highly productive as well. Daily exercise if you can. And anyone want to guess what the third one is? This is a neuroscientist study that said that this is the most powerful way to be more productive.
Meditate.
Sorry?
Meditate.
Yep, that's it. Meditation. So see, in that order, if you can do those 3 things and make sure you're doing them, that actually increases your productivity massively. I think meditation, again, is super powerful because it effectively calms the monkey brain. I don't know if you've heard that phrase, or the reptilian brain inside human being. It's the most powerful one. Tim Ferriss, I don't know if you've heard of him. He does a podcast where he interviews the top performers around the world. He said there was only one habit that stood out amongst every single top performer in the world he interviewed. And he's interviewed like Arnold Schwarzenegger, chess prodigies, everything, like every single top performer you can imagine. And he said 80% of them had a meditation practice. Right? So if you want to become, you know, a top performer in what you do, almost by that kind of example alone, meditation is one of the most powerful things you can do. Probably the most powerful after sleep and exercise. Talent stacking. I'm going to give you an example here. There's another Scott Adams cartoon, so I'll let you read that. So what's the concept of talent stacking? So here's, I'll kind of explain the concept here, but this is what Scott Adams again said, is he's a famous art cartoonist who doesn't have much artistic talent and has never taken a college level writing class. But he says few people are good at both drawing and writing. When you add in ordinary business skills, strong work ethic, my risk tolerance, and my reasonably good sense of humor, I'm fairly unique. And in this case, uniqueness has commercial value. So the point is that it's very difficult to become the best in the world at a single thing, right? There's only probably going to be a handful of people, let's say top golfers in the world like Tiger Woods and those other ones. And if you can become the best in the world at what you do, you'll be obviously rewarded disproportionately. As you can imagine, you make millions. However, the other thing you can do is try and build what's known as a talent stack, which is a unique set of skills that no one has that combination, or is a very rare combination of skills. And it's much easier to do. So for example, could you become, as you know, you all have great EYP experience, could you become a great public speaker, a great debater, very good at negotiation, very good at sales, right? And you can write well. There's very few people who can do all 5 of those things particularly well. And if you can do all 5 of those things particularly well, you actually would get disproportionately rewarded for it because you have a unique talent stack as opposed to one single talent or skill that's better than anyone else in the world. So for a lot of us, it's very rare for anyone to become the best in the world at a particular thing. But the question I would have for you, what is the talent stack that you want to build? An example one for business could be, if you become just good, that's at accounting, managing people, marketing, resourcing, all of those points there, you don't have to become the best in the world at any of those. But if you were to become pretty good at all of those bullet points, you would be a pretty impressive business person to deal with, right? And you would actually probably do very, very well in business just having a good set of skills across all of those bullet points. So I think thinking about what you want to do with your life and your career in general is thinking about what is the talent stack that you want to build, and more importantly, to where you want to get to, what talent stack do you need to build in order to get there, right? And think about even things like being able to read body language is actually quite a strong talent to have. Even the basic ability to read body language would be a great addition to a talent stack, for example. So I'm not saying do all of these things with business, but really think about what is the talent stack you want to build. And I'll tell you that if you can build a unique talent stack, you can actually get rewarded very well in life. I will do very well in the career you want to pursue. There we go. Commitment versus attachment emotion. I think I'll go into this one because I think I won't ask you the question because I think you guys are quite switched on around this. But there's a big difference between being committed to something and being attached or emotionally attached to something. Attachment is where you bring a lot of emotion to the outcome or the thing you want to achieve. And what that does, it actually makes you less effective in being able to achieve it. So what commitment looks like is that you have integrity around achieving that goal, but you don't have the attachment or emotion. So if it doesn't get achieved or is not getting achieved, you look at it dispassionately and you recommit to achieving it, but you don't put emotion in there either about yourself or someone else or the situation, right? So you look at what's actually happening. A way to do this is, and I'll give you an example, is I write poetry, and I was shortlisted as one of 14 poetry writers of ethnic minorities in the UK for a national mentorship scheme, but only the top 10 get in. And unfortunately, I didn't get in. I remember getting the email that said, okay, sorry, so you were in the top 14, but you didn't make it to the top 10. You won't be part of this mentorship scheme. And I was really disappointed and really kind of upset. But being committed versus attached or emotional, what I thought was, okay, so what can I do now? What I did was I emailed them and said, look, Given that only 4 of us out of the country didn't make it, is there anything we could do? Like, could we get involved? Could we come along to some of the sessions? You know, could I pay to attend the 1-week training course that everybody goes on? And they said, okay, let us think about it. And then they came back to me and they basically said, look, you can attend all of the sessions that we're going to run for free. You just have to pay for the 1-week course and we'll give it to you at a discounted rate. It'll be like 300 quid. So effectively, I got pretty much the entire benefit of doing the mentorship program for £300, right? There were 2 other people or 3 other people who didn't get chosen of the 14. None of them did what I did. None of them followed up and none of them got that benefit, right? Because they were, one of them was particularly upset that she hadn't been chosen, right? Because I know her. So by removing attachment and emotion, you can actually, and looking at commitment and saying, what am I actually committed to achieving in this thing? You can actually become more effective. This also works with relationships, as I said. Like, remove the emotion and say, what are you committed to? So if there's someone you've had an argument with, a friend or someone you love, look at, are you committed to having that relationship or that friendship with that person, that love and that connection with them, or are you attached to the emotion and attached to being right? Okay. Sorry, I'm giving you quite a lot of heavy stuff here, so sorry, there's a lot coming, but I wanted to get it all across. Quick question around infinite games. Okay, so does anyone know the concept of finite versus infinite games? No? Brock, I think you said you knew?
Yeah, I watched a lot of Simon Sinek about it. I believe the infinite game is defined by undefined players, undefined objective, but a defined set of rules, right?
Kind of. This is, I don't know if it's the defined set of rules. I think a finite game has a defined set of rules as well. It's the infinite game that doesn't necessarily have a defined set of rules. So here's the thing. This is the guy that came up with the concept. A finite game is played for the purpose of winning, an infinite game for the purpose of continuing the play. So a finite game has an end. So imagine like a soccer match or a game of a board game or a Monopoly. There's a clear objective, there's a clear winning, it's clearly time bound, there's a start and there's an end. My question for you guys is life a finite game or an infinite game?
Can I say it depends on what we want? Imagine if we put ourselves a specific goal and we just think about it, like just achieving that, probably is going to be a finite game. But on the other side, if we want to just enjoy it and try to learn as much as possible, I think we can turn it into an infinite game.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think religion also plays a role in this, because if you believe that it's going to go on and on and on and you're going to keep coming back, then it influences how you perceive the game you're playing.
Yeah. Very cool. So my belief, and actually I think James Cass also agrees with that, is life is actually an infinite game. That there are no set rules. There's no winning at life, right? Even though we were kind of taught and programmed, by media about certain things, there isn't necessarily a win that you can have in life. And actually life is an infinite game. And if you look at, I would say after this call, one of the next actions you can take is look up the concepts of finite and infinite games. And I think if you play life like a finite game, you have a very different experience and quality of life than if you play life like it's an infinite game. And I would think about playing life as an infinite game, not a finite game. Right? It'll make a very, very big difference in the choices you make and how you approach your life in general. Okay, and we're going to finish here. It depends on your religion. Yes, it's true. And I'm going to finish on the concept of little things. And this is the final message, is to enjoy the little things in life, because one day you'll look back and realize they were the big things. So we will always be focused on attached or focused on things that we want to achieve, whether it's that degree or winning, getting the job or, getting married, etc. There's always kind of big things and big work and big goals that we want to achieve. But I think when you look back at the end of our lives, and this is something that people have said, it's actually the little things that they were the big things. So for me, it's like, I have a 2-year-old daughter. It's reading a book to her just before she goes to bed. And I know that, that is super precious time. It's such a small thing, but actually I know when my life is over, when I'm old and looking back, I'll remember and cherish the fact that, that was actually one of the most powerful and lovely things that I used to do was read to her before she fell asleep. And at the moment, there's lots of big goals I've got. I'm trying to get this with my work in particular, and get like sales made and etc. And there's a lot of stress around it. But at the end of our lives, I think it'll be the times that we spent laughing with our friends, or we spent in the company of our parents, or we spent with our brothers or sisters, or seeing a sunset of an ocean we'd never been to, a place, visiting a place we've never been. It's actually going to be those little things that are the things that will be the things that we're happy that we'll look back and realize that these were actually the important big things in life. So I think I just wanted to end with that, and think about for yourselves, like in your lives right now, what are the little things that you do that actually are the big things, where you actually have that quality, and it could be just reading a book on your balcony in the sunshine. Like, have a real think about paying attention to the quality of the little things you do, because they might just be the very big things in your life. Cool. I think that's me. So any questions? Oops, we're going backwards. Any questions or anything on that? Sorry, I gave you a hell of a lot. That's basically all the stuff I have in my armory of mental models and effectiveness in an hour. It's taken me my entire life to get to all of these lessons. So sorry I know it's a lot to take on, but I think the purpose of the call is to have you introduced to the concepts, and you can start kind of researching and looking at them yourselves a bit more. Any questions?
So there's one question I had for the talent stacking, because I'm slight. Oh, I know this, but I also am very familiar with another model, which says basically the reason why Apple is successful is not because it is the best on, like, just a little bit better than average on everything, but it's because it's the best on one thing that it's really good at, and at the rest it's just average, which is saying that definitely it doesn't mean that you can ignore certain elements, but identify what is the thing that really drives you and focus on that. Yeah.
So I would say that it might be different for companies than others, but what is Apple really good at? So they're really good at design.
Yeah.
They're really good at marketing, right? They're really good at the technical build of so there's actually a big talent stack that sits behind Apple, behind that objective. If you think about it, like, so they're much better at marketing than, say, most other companies in the world, right? That's probably one of their main skills. So it's not actually the products they produce, but they also produce great products, right? So I think it is different for companies than individuals, but I think you can still have that overall objective or thing you want to achieve, but what is the talent stack that sits beneath it? And I think the reason talent stacking is important is when you guys start working, I don't know if any of you are on full-time work, but effectively they give you a job description, which is like this box, right, on a piece of paper that says this is what you need to fit into, but you don't fit in that box. You're like a circle that only overlaps partly with that box, right? And what they try and do is they try and make you expand your circle to fit the rest of the box, instead of thinking, this is my circle, let me expand who I am so I encompass that job description but also fill out multiple other skills. An example could be when I was a management consultant, there were 6 grades. You could go from the graduate all the way up to the vice president, and only the last 2 grades were allowed to sell work, because you can obviously only sell work if you're senior. But I did loads of sales jobs as a student before I became a consultant, and I knew how to sell. And I think I was just been promoted to the 3rd grade. So we went C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, vice president, and only C5 and vice presidents were allowed to sell. And I'd just become a C3, and I sold £250,000 worth of work at one client. And everyone was like, oh my God, you sold, like, this is amazing. Like, I was like, no, because I used to sell accidental death insurance on the phone to people in the evenings. I used to work in this suit shop and sell to people in the suit shop. I used to work here and sell here. So I always knew how to sell. It's just you guys didn't let me do any of this. till I got to this grade, because you wouldn't let me have, and I had more sales skills when I started that job than the people that were at that C5 grade, because those people at C5 got taught nothing about sales until they got promoted to C5. And then they were given a whole load of sales training and then told, here's your sales target, go out and sell. So that's an example of talent stacking. Now imagine, like, when I was that grade, how impressive it was for the entire company that I managed to sell £250,000 worth of work. But for me, it was quite normal because I built that talent, that part of my talent stack. So I think it's, even public speaking, we as EY peers, we get drilled in being able to speak in front of 300 people. There's such a rare skill to be able to stand up in front of people and talk, let alone debate in front of 300 people, right? This is like an insanely unique skill. The ability to facilitate a conversation, the ability to work with 12 to 15 people from different countries that you've never met before to solve a problem. People don't have these kinds of skills, and we discount them because we don't realize how amazing it is to have that kind of set. And especially if we kind of end up chairing or doing other stuff, we get such a big skill set. We don't realize the value. I didn't realize the value of this skill set when I joined the workforce, right? But yeah, it's super impressive. So I think part of thinking is like, what is the talent stack you already have? And you guys, my peers, will have an incredible talent stack already that you'd be surprised how few people have this, even much more senior than you. And you can really shine using these skills. But also thinking about what are the other talent stacks you want to build in. Just think about it. Like, over the course of your career, the ability to speak in public will make one of the biggest differences in how you progress.
I can absolutely concur. And being a chairperson, that is also a very, very crucial skill set that is very, very useful in a lot of different situations.
I would say you have to also be able to describe the skill set, because I didn't have the words to describe it when I started working. I didn't know that it's called facilitation, right? So when I applied for jobs, I didn't put the word facilitation down. I didn't, there's actually some specific skill sets, words or definitions for the skill sets you picked up. So when you do job applications, or when you make sure you mention those specific skill sets, otherwise people don't know what you're saying when you say you did EYP.
Can I build on that?
Yeah, of course.
Because I had to rephrase my question based on what just was said. I have a small story. So I was going for a job interview and I studied arts. I was really into painting, the arts, and also EYP. And I was into organizing and all of this sort of thing. So it was organized. I was meeting with a guy who was doing something in the art sector, and I was describing all of those things I was interested in and I was doing. And in the end, it was more like, well, you have to pick one, otherwise you're not employable. Essentially, that was the message that was sent to me. And the question then is, well, we know those skills are amazing and they are useful and they let us do things, but how do you convince others that they are?
I don't think you have to convince them. You can demonstrate it. So let's say, I don't know, art, for example. If you're an artist, you need to be able to sell your work. You need to be able to pitch. You need to be able to talk in front of a room and persuade them around the quality of your art. You need to be able to persuade art galleries. You need to be able to market. You need to be able to negotiate. Or just think about the entire skill set you need to be a successful artist. So when they say that kind of, and you might become a teacher as an artist. A lot of artists teach as well. So could you teach, like, what kind of facilitation skills from EYP, for example, would help you teach more effectively? That's another thing that artists, So I think demonstrate rather than convince. And what did this person do? Was it an interview? Sorry, or was it?
It was an interview. Yeah, he was running a museum and very deep in the art market. It was a while back, but yeah. My question was more, people generally, at least my impression is, they believe that you have to have this one thing, otherwise you're not really, as you said, they can't put you in a box, and that's not employable. You're not something that they can define and then be interested in, because they don't know what you are exactly.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I would meet the box, because you need to fit the box to be able to get the job, but then demonstrate skill outside of it. Okay. The other thing you can do is relate, like I just did around, working in an art gallery, or whatever. You do need those other skills. You just need to relate it to that scenario. They may not have thought about it in that sense, right? So if you do, I don't know, if you have an art gallery, just using that as an example, you probably do need to sell work, right? So there has to be some skill set around selling or persuading or talking in front of a group of 50 people that's come to see your artwork and being able to inspire them with the artist's work, right? That's public speaking, that's sales, that's persuasion, that's marketing. There's negotiation. It's, as I said, like, you have to relate it to them, but they may not think about it in that sense. But I think we get fooled into thinking that it's so it's our schools, the way we're taught in school lets us down, right? We learn, the real way to learn is through experimentation, not here's the right way to do it, then you do it once in an exam and you passed. The way everything we learn as human beings, we do it through trial and error. And that's the problem that a lot of big businesses and companies have, is that they get taught there's one answer or there's one way to do something. So if they're trying to solve a problem, they try and pick the perfect way to solve it and then try and apply it. And then the real world gives them feedback that says, sorry, that's not the way the real world works. And their idea fails. Okay. And the reason this happens is I've forgotten who described it. I think it's a guy called, I think it's Adam or something. He said, we have a model of the world and how it works, right? So this is us, this is our model of the world, and this is the real world. And we take action based on our model, but then we get feedback from the real world. So we're sat there going, well, my model of the world says if I do this, then if I do X, Y should happen. And then when we do it, the real world gives us Z, and we're totally confused as to why that happened. And the reason that happens is our model of the world does not reflect the way the world actually works. And when you find people saying things like that doesn't make sense, and a lot of people said that, say, for example, after Brexit happened or after Trump was elected, to give you political examples, it was because their model of the world did not match what the real world was. So I think, I don't know how I got onto that topic about the model. Sorry, but I think, experimentation. So experimentation. So there's a book called Black Box Thinking, which is really cool. And it has an example about, I think it was Unilever, were trying to produce, the powdered washing powder for your washing machine. And they had this funnel, because it's actually a vapor and it gets condensed into the powder. And what was happening was the powder was coming out clumpy, in lumps, and not coming out fine enough. And it was also blocking the tube they were using. So they got a whole load of mathematicians in, and scientists and fluid dynamics guys, and they got them to work it out. And what they did was they worked out the perfect funnel shape, the computer programs, everything. And then they tried to get it to work, and it failed, right? And so they didn't stop there. What they then did was they went and got a whole load of evolutionary biologists. Now, why would you get a bunch of biologists together? So what the biologists did, they said they took the existing nozzle and they made 10 changes, 10 different tiny changes to the nozzle. And then they tested that nozzle. And the one that performed best, they took that one, and then they did 10 changes to that one. And then they tested all 10 of those again. I think they went through something like 10 or 12 generations until they got to the perfect nozzle that produced the perfect fine washing powder. And it's something that a human being would never have designed, or a computer could never have designed, because it's completely, it's like, you can find it online. It's like this tube that has like all these bumps along it in different sizes and shapes. And again, no human being or computer could ever have designed that shape, but it's the perfect shape to produce washing powder that's perfectly fine and doesn't clump. And that's the same. So we don't, as I said, the world doesn't, the reason why we need to experiment and do things like that is we have a model of our world, but we need to get feedback from the real world. So we need to do little experiments constantly, so we get feedback from the real world. So then we keep adjusting our approach until our model of the world better matches what's really going on in the world, because of the feedback and the iteration we've done. And that's how we learn to walk, for example. I'll give you another thing that I think, before we go, that I've been thinking about recently, is that the world is very focused on analysis. So it's taking everything and breaking it all the way down to constituent parts, like going all the way down to an atom, right? And it's not focused on synthesis, which is how things work together. as much. So for example, if you only focused on a leg, the only thing you can do to move forward with one leg is hop, right? And if you have the other leg and you only look at the right leg, all you can do to move forward is hop. But walking comes about as a synthesis of the two legs being able to work together, right? So analysis only gets you to one leg, but synthesis brings forward, or walking emerges from the synthesis of two legs working together. And I think that the way human beings learn quickest is not by analysis. And we have this in language, is that we don't learn to speak by someone teaching us every single individual letter of the alphabet, then teaching us every single individual word in a sentence, and then we say our first sentence as a child. We get taught and we're constantly bombarded with full sentences all the time. And then eventually as a child, you might only say one or two sentences, but the way you're being taught is actually much more in full sentences. So when my daughter says three words together, she knows the timing of the sentence together. When we learn a language, find this, that our other tongue or mother language, whether it's one or two languages, we understand an entire sentence as one unit. We don't try and break down or understand each individual word, right? So the way I learned Italian at the Italian school I went to was they would play us movies at full speed for 5 minutes and then ask us, what did you pick up? And then they play it again. Then they give us a transcript with words missing. They forced us to learn at the level of synthesis, not the level of we're going to break down each word that everyone says in the sentence individually. So I think if you want to learn anything, and I'm trying to learn the Arabic drum at the moment, is I'm learning from synthesis, not analysis. So I'm trying to learn the entire like the full rhythm to begin with. And I think that's something that might be a way to accelerate learning, is to think about learning as the entire unit or entire sentences rather than individual notes and say in music or individual letters when you're learning a language or individual words. Just something I've been thinking about randomly, but yeah, it might be worth testing that out as an idea. Thanks, Ellen.
I have a question about integrity. And so what is really the balance between like this absolute integrity where you adhere to every promise you make and like feeling pleasure? Because for instance, if you make yourself a promise that you would, for instance, earn an MBA degree and you're like a year into this program and then you eventually discover you don't like it, but you made the promise.
Yeah.
And so do you still need to adhere to your promise even if you understand that you don't really want it anymore?
So the question is, at that point, then what is an integrity, right? So are you dropping out because you are finding it too difficult, or because you're emotionally not wanting to do it, or you're being lazy, or is it
no, like you just understand this it's not yours, like you wanted to do business,
okay,
but you took this MBA degree and it's not yours, and you want, for instance, to do arts.
So here's my question: is it in integrity to carry on doing the degree for what at that point in time?
Okay, I see what you mean.
It's not anymore, because to carry on that would be doing something that doesn't really fit with what you've now learned more, you've taken more information in. You're doing it for the right reason. You're not doing it because you find it difficult or because you're being lazy or because you want to go, travel around the world. It's because this is not now the right fit for you, and you've learned and you've kind of taken that new information in.
Okay, thank you.
That would make more sense. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
All right, cool. All right, thanks everyone for attending. I think I got some really confused looking faces, but thank you for some interesting conversations and comments. I hope that was useful for all of you. I think, and if you want the slides, Helena, happy to share the slides so you guys have got a reference point for it. And yeah, as I said, I've given you a hell of a lot. I've given you basically all the mental models that I'm kind of aware of at the moment. So it was a brief introduction to all of them. So I think look at the ones that resonate for you and see if you can apply them. And another thing on integrity, it's not, you can't always, as I said, no human being can 100% of the time do everything that they said they would do, right? But it's a model of trying to adhere to it. And then you become very careful about what you promise you will do as well. But I think, again, think of it in terms of it forces you to live to the higher level of thinking that you have. Cool. Awesome. I'll let you guys go. If you have any other questions, let Helena know. Sorry, we've run over a little bit, but I hope that was useful.
Thank you so much for joining this alumni webinar, and thank you, Sol, for all of those special tips and hints how to work. We definitely try. I think some of us have tried already to implement some of it in our working life. It's always a challenge, but whenever I hear again such input like yours, I always go back and reflect on how my personal work look like. So I think this is something that is worth even being repeated. And we'll have this webinar online, so you can always watch it again and remotivate yourself for working more effectively. Especially now, it's very important for everyone who has to work from home and have a different environment. Yes, so thank you very much for joining. And Sol, for you, that you again was so ready to spend 1.5 hours with us doing EYP as you did in 1995, continue doing the same. So thank you so much. Applause.
Yeah,
to you.
no problem. Thanks everyone. Thanks for attending.
Bye. Okay.
Bye.
Great stuff.